Hey there, strategic authorpreneurs. I'm Crystal Hunt.
And I'm Michela Mitrani. We're here to help you save time, money, and energy as you level up your writing career.
Welcome to episode 26 of the Strategic Authorpreneur podcast. Today, we're digging into translating your stories into multiple languages and some of the upsides, downsides, and roadblocks or speed bumps that might come along with that process. But first, what have we been up to this week?
Reading is always something that challenges me. And today, before saying anything, I'm going to show you this. Create Story Conflict by Eileen Cook. And this is actually a book that was released not too long ago, Crystal, and I'm enjoying it very, very much. I'm on this path where I want to really try to dig into the craft of writing. And one of the things that I always think it's important for a writer to know is conflict and how you build up that thing on your book. And this really it's a title that gives a lot of interesting chunks and suggestion on how to basically level up that side of things. So what I like is all the example that gives you, the exercise that you can do. It's really, really a great reading, and I'm very happy that I started reading it. I basically put down another couple of books that I was reading because I already read stuff by Eileen and I really liked it. So really recommended if you want to pump up that story conflict. Go definitely buy Create Story Conflict, and it's one of the release of the Creative Academy. Just should we say that that's something that is important? That's something that we are proud of. That's actually the fourth book of a series. I had the luck and the fortune to read all the previous book. The series one by Crystal, Scrappy Rough Draft by Donna Barker, and Create Better Characters, but by the same Eileen. And really, they're all great. This one is really recommended. And what I've been up to in the last week. Actually, there is something that we discussed recently, me and Crystal. We are trying to really focus on the next year, even though we are not yet there. But I've asked Crystal to bounce off some ideas of her, and she gave me her opinion. And those ideas are basically based on what's going to happen to my entrepreneur journey in 2021. Now that I have a few products out there, I basically asked her, what do you think I should do with the assets, because we call them assets now. We are fancy that way. The assets that I have story-wise. And she gave me some really great suggestions. I'm thinking of actually going the extra mile, and I will try to not only release in English but also in Italian, but that's going to require a lot of things that needs to fit together. So I really needed her help and to figure out stuff, and she was really useful on that regard. That's between parentheses one of the reasons why you need an accountability buddy / coach / friend. And I'm happy again that I was able to find her now a year and 3 months ago. I remember the date even when I bothered her on the Creative Ink Festival. But anyways, that's what I've been up to, and I want to know what happened in your writing world.
Well, someone, not mentioning any names, has been pestering me for the next magic story. So I have been working away on that. And by the time this episode comes out, the story should be very nearly out, which is exciting. So Luna is the one that we are talking about, and it is the River's End romance with a touch of magic in it. So I am excited to have that. It's been a long time since I released a book. I've been in stockpiling mode. So I've been writing and sitting on all of those pieces and not releasing them because I have a very clearly defined strategy for the fall and how I want to roll out a whole bunch of things in a short period of time. but anticipation is brutal when you've written all this stuff and you just are not releasing it to the world. It's an interesting experiment. So I am practicing being patient, which is one of the main things I'm doing. The other thing is I just ordered the Occupation Thesaurus. I ordered a hard copy, so it's in the mail on its way to me now, but it's by Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi, and the Emotional Wound Thesaurus that I love so much and I'm always talking about. There's a whole series of these thesaurus guides for writers, but the job one I think is going to be really helpful, because when you write a lot of short stories, you need to create so many different characters and you don't want to keep reusing the same careers over and over again. So I'm excited to flip through. There's a lot of kind of unusual jobs in there as well as some of the more usual suspects. So I'm keen to poke around and see what this guide includes, and I will definitely tell you more about it on a future episode after I've had a chance to really dig into it. But if there's anybody out there who's struggling with jobs for characters, this is now a resource that's available. So I would recommend checking it out. I've never been disappointed with one of those guides, so it's always a pretty safe bet. But today we are going to dig into talking about translating your stories into multiple languages. So Michele earlier was mentioning assets, and your intellectual property, your stories are an asset, and there are lots of different ways to turn those assets into multiple products. And one of those is utilizing the opportunity that comes from translating your stories into different languages. Now, both of us have experience with doing this, but in very, very different ways. So we're going to give you a couple different perspectives on how this can work, and then talk about some of the things that we found challenging as well, so that you know what to watch out for if you are thinking you're going to dive into this. And there are 3 ways that you can really handle translations as an approach to multiplying your products. One is translating it yourself. One is hiring a translator and then producing the translated version yourself. And the third one is actually selling translation rights to another company who then handles everything and actually does the production, printing, distribution in their country. And so that's more like selling foreign language edition rights. And so that's the third way that most people would use one of those 3. Now, Michele, let's talk at first about doing it yourself, because you are multilingual, which is very, very handy when it comes to doing those translations. So can you tell us a little bit about the process of translating your own stories and what you've done with that so far?
Absolutely. One thing that I want to very state clearly is that I had completely no idea what I was doing when I started these projects. And hopefully, what I'm going to tell you now is going to save up some major, big, majestical mistake that I made while doing my translation project. So there are a few things that I would like you to be aware if you want to translate your own book. So that means that requires that you have a solid understanding of both languages. Now, in my case, which I always say I'm not sure of my English, and I'm completely every single time aware of my deficiency, I was able to power through that project because I had time and I used it to really sit down and translate my things. But what I'm saying is, if you really have time to do one thing, is make sure that you really have that level of proficiency in that language, because if not, it's going to require you, I would say, 3 to 4 more times. Now, that being said, you absolutely don't have to be mother tongue or even near that level. I found that you don't really need to be an advanced level, but you do have to be, I would say, between the 70-75% in order to do this in a timely manner. And in my case, what I did was translating a 90,000 word science fiction book, and it took me around 1 year and a half, which is a very long time because I use every single day that I have, basically, not for writing my stuff, but for translating. So I don't like to think of it this way, so I'm not going to say I lost 1 year of my life, but I would just say that it wasn't part of a strategy. I didn't have the book 2, 3, or 4 release of that book, I just translated it because I thought, hey, if I translate this in the English market, which is like, I don't know, 100 times bigger than the Italian market, I'm going to sell more books. Very wrong. I'm not going to go into the details on that. I didn't have a platform. I didn't really know what I was doing. But the important thing for you is that having a solid understanding of that language. So you might have studied French, for example, in school, or Spanish. Knowing how to speak and how to understand is different than like the writing word. There are so many nuances and grammar and stuff. Just make sure that you know the basic. And if you don't know what's your level, just give 1,000 words of the translation of your work to a mother tongue, and ask this person, what do you think? Like, can you understand even when I'm saying? And let that inform your process. That's something I did not do, which I regret, because that would have informed me on what to do next, how to approach the project. So, for example, in my case, I'm doing now in 2020 something I should have been doing in 2014 when I did this project, Crystal of Translation. I should have been writing in English instead of just translating, because that your understanding of the language and the grammar is better and it's more refined, and you understand better how it works grammatically, under the syntax and all these kind of things. So I would say make sure what's your level, and then try not necessarily to translate, but really write directly in that language. Once that you have assessed your level of proficiency, I want you to take a vision and the time to really flesh out a plan on what are you going to do. Because again, another thing I did not have was a plan. So I was just basically looking at this 90,000 words novel and really having no idea how to translate things. So I have to figure out several software and resources along the way. So again, research, I would say it's one of the key words here. So first thing, a better than average understanding on the language that you want to translate, and then rely on some tools. So you don't have to go fancy on the tool side, my opinion again, because everything that I used to translate, and now there are way more fancy things, but I use Google Translate and Word Reference. That's for the first draft. And then I can assure you goes a long way. Compared to 5 years ago, with Google Translate before, you could have like a chunk of 10,000 words or 20,000 words, and Google Translate would translate it for you. Now I tried that, and I don't know if it was just for that day, but it didn't allow me to do that. So you can just translate 2,000 words or 3,000 words. There is a limit. So, but except for that, the tool is that, and it has refined with the years. So definitely, I would suggest you to use that if you want to have like a bedrock of your work. And I don't know, Crystal, if you want to add something on that, but there is really one thing that I want to say before even going forward to all this translation, do-it-yourself project thing. You absolutely, and I'm saying this, stressing as much as I can, you absolutely need a native language person to at least better read everything that you translate. And I used 6 of these people. Every single one of them made the manuscript better so that I could give this relatively typo-free version of a translation of my book to then 2 to 3 editors. So you see, it's not only one, but it's 2 or 3 different people. So the process is more difficult because I really had no understanding on the grammar side of things. So I needed more point, and I needed to rely on more people to help me on that side. Is there anything that I said so far that is interesting, Crystal, that you want to stop me and ask me stuff?
I think it's all interesting, but I think, yeah, you're on the right track with all of it. The key that you cannot express enough is that you cannot edit your own translations, even more so than not editing your own language's work. You have to have other people looking through it, and you are not in a position to double check any of that work. And so I think just being aware of what that really means. It is a time commitment to find those people, and you also need to think about the budget of, are you going to be able to pay them for their time? Are you trading for time? How are you compensating the people who are helping you with these? You may have fans who are in those languages asking for those translations, and they are willing to help you, which is fine. But also be aware, if you're not paying your helpers, then you also are not quality checking in the same way, because you are taking whoever has volunteered. So you just need to be aware of the time commitment, the extra energy, and the budget that's going to be required to pull that off. Even if you are doing it yourself, in quotations, it's not quite the same as a lot of other DIY parts.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you mentioned about the cost, I want to share like basically how much I paid for the editing, because if you ask somebody to translate for you 90,000 words, probably Krista is going to tell you a bit more, but I did a few researches, and at least for my case, for that genre and that kind of things, they asked me several $1,000s. And that's like, because sometimes people will charge you by the word, sometimes by the time. It depends on the translator. But you have to be willing to sacrifice a chunk of money for the translation. But even with the editing, Crystal, I needed to pay a sum of money. So even though I did it for a fraction of the cost, this book in English, which I'm just going to tell the name because we want to also kind of promote ourselves. The name of the book is Omnilogos, so you can even check what the book is and if there is like the professionality that I wanted really to convey. But basically, it's this science fiction book, and it really was a coordinated effort from my part and 3 different editors. The first person that checked the mother tongue was teacher that lived in Rome but was born in New York and spoke English fluently. She was actually she was a teacher of English in Italy, and I had to pay her, of course. Then the second one was a lady in the UK, and of course I had to specify this book is from the American market. And then was a gentleman from South Carolina that went over that, and again had to pay him. After that first 2 readings, he found a lot of mistakes and a lot of typos. And again, that's because the product you're starting from is fundamentally more, I hesitate to use the word, but it's more deficient. There are many more things that you have to consider are going to be faulty and are going not to work, because again, it's not something that you're writing in your mother tongue. It's something that you translate in a language from another language, and there are concepts that are different from you, and it's super hyper hard to go through all of these things and catch everything at the first or at the second editing. So I actually needed not only 1 round of editing, but I needed 3. And of course, I had to pay the price for that. So I would say I paid around 800 to 900 Canadian dollars, if not more, for this 3 round of editings. And then after that, imagine that I gave the book that I was proofreaded to a gentleman, a writer, a Canadian writer, and he also finds still something to proofread. So we know that typos are immortal. That's 10 times more true when you are actually translating your own stuff. So this is not to demotivate you in any possible way, shape, or form. I am very proud of what I did with Omnilogos. I learned a lot of things, how not to do things, actually. But really, the thing is, you have to understand, like, is this really worth your time and money, or there are projects that could have a more immediate benefit if you are looking for visibility or the cash, as they will say. So evaluate that. That's very important. And the last thing that I would like to say is there are some resources out there that can help you. If you have no idea where to find somebody to proofread or edit, there are like platform like Upwork to hire freelance, and we're going to put a show note there. There are so many other things, like there is another platform called BabelCube that actually will help you translate with other translator your book, but you have to share the royalties. I got mixed reviews about this service, but there are opportunities out there. So I just want to ask Crystal if you had any other remarks over there, or.
Oh, I think that's a great summing up. I think it's very different if it's fiction versus nonfiction. And I think the closer to the nonfiction side you are, the more the translation tools are useful, in that you're translating fact in a pretty straightforward way usually, versus, if you're trying to translate poetry or a lyrically written fiction, you're gonna really have a hard time using any of those tools to help you do that, because it's the essence of the thing that you're translating. It's not the actual words. And so that has definitely been the biggest challenge in translating a lot of what I have worked on, is that what I have worked on and translated has not been nonfiction. It's been children's books, and often rhyming children's books, which is a whole nother nightmarish ball of wax to try and do. You're basically hiring a translator to rewrite your book in their own language. It's not actually a translation project in that way. So there are a few interesting things around that. So this one is a good example. This is one of the books, Arithmetic. This is the French version, Arithmetique, that was published by Gumboot Books, which was the children's book company that I had years and years ago. And this one, we hired a translator. Her name was Christine, and she was a fluent French speaker. And so she did the translation, but she did it so that it retained the essence of the original story. So she basically rewrote it in French as opposed to just a direct translation. And that does have interesting implications when you think about translating picture books, because you aren't just dealing with translating words that will reflow on the screen. If you can see, I'm holding up to the camera, there's only a certain position in each of these books that really works to put words. And if you're translating from a Latin alphabet type book to something that uses characters, then that can be even more challenging, because they really don't break the same way. I have a couple of books. The Safety Superheroes have been translated into a whole ton of languages to make them more accessible. It's like a fall prevention education book that I wrote a few years ago. And that one is in about 5 different languages. And it's great for accessibility, but it is really challenging when you're trying to do the layouts with characters and making sure you've got the right font to accurately replicate those things properly, and to know where the page breaks go can be really hard. Then this one is Japanese as well. So this we did Then It Rained version. We had an intern named Tsugumi from Japan, and she did a Japanese translation as part of her summer project. And so we did a dual language where it has the English and the Japanese together on each page. But it is definitely, from a layout perspective, whether it's from characters or if it's rhyming and it's supposed to have the breaks at certain words, that can be really hard to maintain when it goes to another language. So if you are thinking about translating something that is very image heavy or very visual and or graphically represented on the page, just be really conscious that those translations, if you're looking for that from your translated product as well, and you're working with someone, you can't just hand over the text that you want translated. You're going to actually have to give them the visuals and ask them to lay it out for you on the page, line by line by line. So we've done a lot of multilingual translations in an educational context. And that's the key pro tip that I can give you, is that when you hand over You need the English on one side, and like a table in your Word document. You need the English on one side, the translated version on the other, and you need it to be line by line by line so that you know exactly where and how to put it on the page. And that also makes it easier if you are trying to proofread it or have somebody proofread it for you, that you can match up visually the characters if you need to, and make sure that none of that has kind of rearranged itself as you go.
So I have a question. What was then having to working with all these translator? Like, what was the process? What were the challenges? What were the difficult things that you would say like you have to pay attention to?
I think they're pretty similar to what you already talked about, which was the first one is you have to have a lot of trust in the person who is doing that translation, because you can't check their work. You don't know what it says when you get it back. So that is particularly challenging. I have a couple that are French, and I speak a bit of French, so I'm able to sort of muddle my way through that and at least notice if something seems horribly wrong. But the subtleties are going to be lost on me because I'm not fluent. So you really do need a huge amount of trust in whoever is doing the translation. And as Michele said earlier, you have to have a couple of editors who are willing to look at it. You also, I think, have to be really aware of your market, because languages are regionally specific. You can translate something into French, but if you are targeting people in France versus people in Quebec, it's going to be very different. Things are, the same phrases are not used, even though on paper it looks like the same language. It's not really. They've branched quite distinctly over time. So same with Spanish. People speak Spanish all over the world, but it's very different depending on which geographic regions you're in. So I think you really have to make sure that if you are doing a single Spanish translation, but you're targeting several different countries, then you need an editor or a mother tongue speaker from each of those regions to review your product and point out areas where it's going to feel not right to them or not accurate. And that's really important to be aware of. I think also, whoever is doing the layouts of that book, or if it's you who has traditionally done the layouts for your book and you've used something like Vellum to do that, you may not be able to do that if you're now using a language that has characters instead of the Latin alphabet. So before you commit to all of this, you need to do a little practice run where you figure out how are you going to produce the actual files and which tool are you going to use, and are you set up for that? InDesign can do just about anything, and you can install fonts from all over the world, which is very cool. But that only works if you know how to use that tool, or if you're using Photoshop to do your page layouts or whatever it is. You need to make sure that you have the option to actually do what needs doing, and you need to get the font information from your translator, because there are lots of, one of the things we found when we were dealing with Mandarin is that there are different fonts and variations and dialects of that visually. And so if your translator created that digital file for you using one type of font and your computer opens it in a different kind of character-based font, you may find yourself in trouble because those don't mean what they meant when the translator put them in, when you take them out to put them in your book. So just be really careful that you have installed the correct version of the same font your translator was using, and that the files you have are an accurate representation of what that person sent to you. Again, a proofreader would probably know that, but not necessarily. So you may also need to send your proofreaders the original translation file and your laid out book file. Now, obviously, some of these things are going to be not so bad if you're dealing with a picture book, because you maybe are only dealing with a couple thousand words. But when it comes to translating a full-length novel or a nonfiction book, there's a lot more work involved in those bigger projects. So I think we did talk about budget earlier, but I think it's really important to make sure that you are very much budgeting for assistance on this. It is not a true DIY kind of process, even when you are handling the bulk of those responsibilities yourself. Okay. So do you have anything that you would leave people with as far as if they're going to try and do it themselves or hire somebody? What are, like, is there 2 or 3 mistakes you made that you can share with us about what went wrong that you've now learned from and will do differently next time?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of things that I can, a couple of epic fails that, as they will say, that I can share. Again, the first thing is I didn't sit down and do my research, both on the market that I was trying to sell my book in, but also researches on the actual moment when I sit down and translate my things. And if you skip that, if you don't do your homework on that side, you're going to lose time over period of time. And what I mean by that is that I would have saved up so much time if at the beginning of the process, I would have known that there were other people that could help me in the process. So, for example, I thought I would do everything by myself when actually giving the first 3 or 4 chapters, not translating the whole thing, but giving the first couple of chapters to a mother tongue and telling and asking him or her, what do you think? What's the level here? What should I look for? There are some mistakes that I do and remake. If I had done that, I would not have lost that much time that the proofreader and the editors then had to fix that. So it pays up so much for you to do that research, to give, I would say, a chapter or a couple of chapters, depending on what kind of books you are having, and have it sampled. That's what I'm hinting at. Have it sampled to, it doesn't have to be an editor. It can be just a person that reads on that genre, so that he or she can tell you what's wrong right off the bat. That's suggestion number 1. Suggestion number 2, I would say it is very important for you not only to realize that this is something you can do by yourself, and it doesn't matter how high is your proficiency in that language. It is important that you surround yourself of people that actually know what they are doing when it comes to rereading your craft. So that is one of the reasons that is actually one of the things that I did right the first time. The first draft, I gave it to a person that can speak both Italian and English. That's fundamental. That is something that I did just because I thought it was a good idea. It actually was. Because she could see what were the mistakes that I made and all the kind of thought processing that went into translating the concept, not the words, the concept from the Italian into English. She was like, I think you mean this when you're saying that. And that is something a proofreader and an editor that is speaking only the English language, in my case, cannot give you. So if you really can invest a bit more, find a translator that can speak your language. It can be Spanish, Portuguese, but that will save you a lot of time. Even, it doesn't have to be necessarily a person that speaks both languages, that is a proofreader or professional editor. It can even be a friend that speaks both of them fluently. But the point is, it's going to save up a lot of time when it comes to translate the concept, not the words. Krista was mentioning that there are sometimes some rhymes, some concept that make sense in Italian, but they don't make absolutely any sense in English. So, for example, catch 2 birds with the stone. There is the equivalent in Italian, but it's framed in a completely different way. So if I say to you, there is no trip for cats, it doesn't completely mean anything to you. But in Italian, which is, and now you're gonna listen to me speaking in Italian for the first time. So we say non c'è trippa per gatti, which means something for us, but has no translation whatsoever in English. So a person that understands my language would be able to translate the concept into the English equivalent. So that would be the last bit of advice that I would like to say. And again, please do spent that time in doing your research and asking for help from people that can speak both languages.
And for those of you who are out there like, oh, I never want to do any of this because this sounds just horrible and like a lot of work and expensive. Yeah, it can be, but there are other options. So I think it's important to point out that there are publishing companies around the world who acquire rights to English books or other languages of books and then do translations as part of their publishing efforts in their own country. And so there are some real advantages to this. Obviously, you don't have to manage the process. Once you sign the contract with them, you hand over the English version, they have it translated, they have it laid out, they publish it. Often a book will require a very different cover. And I think there's a couple authors that I have worked with doing their website stuff over the years that have fantastic foreign rights versions of their covers on their websites. And it's really neat to see how different countries have very different conventions for cover design as well. And, it's not directly translation, it's not just the word, but seeing how that ripples out is quite fascinating. So if you take a look at susannielsen.com, and we'll put the links for these in the show notes, but susannielsen.com is a YA primarily writer, and she writes all kinds of good stuff, very funny, and has won a ton of awards. And so her books have been translated all over the world, and they are fantastic. And she has a foreign editions covers page, which is what I will link to in the show notes, that shows the covers from all over the world. And alanstratton.com is the other one. And Alan's books have also won many awards and been translated all over the world. Some turned into films, all kinds of exciting things. So his page as well for each of his books has a tab that shows all of the foreign edition covers for each of those. And that is very cool to take a peek at, just to get a sense of how different things really are in other countries in terms of those conventions for the artwork as well. So handing off those rights can be very freeing. Usually you will be written a check. It will generally be nowhere near as big as you would think, given how fancy it sounds to say you've sold foreign rights to one of your novels. But it does mean you don't have to do anything except cash the check. And then maybe hunt up a post on Instagram of someone else holding your book in a different language, which is very cool. The one thing to watch out for is that you may be, as an indie publishing author, approached by different companies saying they are interested in purchasing foreign rights. You do need to vet those a little bit, and you need to do your research, because sometimes they're just asking for you to send them book files, and they may or may not be legit companies. And so you want to make sure that you look them up, check out their business website, ask them some questions, get to know who you're dealing with. They should have someone who can negotiate with you in English. It should not be a problem to provide contracts and details of what exactly you are signing over, and make sure that that's all very clear. Now, you may not want to do all that on your own. And so there are agents and agencies who specialize in helping with foreign rights sales. And so as an indie, that is definitely something to look into. And there are sections, the Alliance for Independent Authors has a great set of information, I believe, on their site around looking at rights and sales and some options for recommending that. And I know they've done podcast episodes on that in the past. So that's definitely something to do some Googling on, is which agencies can represent you in those selling of your foreign translation rights markets. And be also very clear when you're looking at those rights agreements. Are you selling foreign rights in English, or are you selling foreign translation rights to be published in whatever that language is in that country? You want to be very, very clear, because you're not just signing away your English publishing rights in those areas. Okay, so That's probably given you enough homework, enough of a place to start for now. We are going to give you one more spot of homework, though, because reviews are very important in helping other authors find our podcast. So thank you to all of you who have left us reviews already. And if you are one of those people who've thought about it and then hasn't actually acted on it, we will be forever grateful if you can leave a review for us wherever it is you're listening to the podcast. We love to hear your feedback. And we have refilled our curious jar. It is full of questions again, and they have come in from all over the place. So let's see what kind of interesting torture is in store for us today. Tell me when to stop.
Now.
Oh, there's so many in here. Okay. It's a blue one. Okay. Ooh, our question for today. If you could have lunch with one writer, living or dead, who would it be? And like, you don't have to have lunch with the dead person. They can come back to life for lunch, so it's not creepy.
Okay. Well, that's difficult. It's simple, but it's not easy. Only one, right?
Only one. You want me to go first? I know who it would be.
Yeah, go.
Okay. I would love to have lunch with Jane Austen. I think she's up there on my favorites list. Pride and Prejudice is one of my all-time favorites. And I just think it would be so interesting to talk to a woman who was writing when that was not a cool thing to do and novels were scandalous. And I would love to know, like, what was the experience like for her of being someone who wrote like that, and talking to her about what has happened with her books, because I have to wonder, if she just felt like we did, that like, oh, a handful of people like my stories and that's great, and then now it's however many years later, a lot, and her legacy is just an epic influence on our current literary society. And I think it would be so interesting to hear her thoughts on that and to find out, what were her intentions. I just remember in English class always reading, poetry or reading these stories, and you have to write these essays on interpreting the deeper meaning that the writer had. And like, did she really just write a romantic comedy and that's all she meant it to be? Or all these deeper allegorical, stories? What was going on there in her mind? What did she think she was doing when she put those out there in the world? And that would be very cool. Also, I would love to maybe go back to her time to have that lunch. So like, we'll sneak a little bit of time travel in there because the dresses are fantastic. So I would like to get in on that action. I feel like we've lost the true having tea in the parlor kind of opportunities these days are a lot more few and far between. So I would love to have that experienced all wrapped up in there as well.
That's
How about
interesting. Probably if you would have asked me that question a few weeks ago, I would have said either Tolkien or Isaac Asimov, because both of them have been a big influence. But I'm not going to give you those names today. I'm going to give you actually a different name, and it's because just most of my writing has had to do with something that presumably he wrote. And I'm saying we presume he's the author because we're not sure. And this author name is Homer, which we think wrote the Odyssey and Iliad, or we say Iliade or Odissea in Italian. Since I gave you a couple of sentences in Italian, today is going to be an Italian episode. And just because really those are the poems that, at least for me, they're very important, and they define the way we tell stories. If you think about what we call Odysseo, the travel and the hero's journey, the very foundation of these things are in that tale. And even the War of Troy, that is also kind of related on that part, at least. It is important for me because there are so many different things that this author, if he existed, was able to convey. And there was poetry in those sentences. There is action, there is adventure. Of course, we're talking about something that is now more than 2,000 years old. We don't know exactly when it was written, the first version, and how many poets rewrote it and stuff. But there might be one person that started it all. So I would be interested in having a conversation with this author, and if he thought that after 2,000 or more years we would read that same work, and still it would propel the way we write and we think and we do things. So that would probably be my answer. A lunch with the author of the Iliad or the Odyssey, Homer.
All right. Now, we would love to hear your answer to that question. So if you can share with us in the comments, either YouTube below the video, or if you visit our website at strategicauthorpreneur.com, you can navigate to episode 26 and answer the question on that page. And
for show notes, links to resources that we mentioned, and for coupons and discounts on the tools we love, please visit us at strategicauthorpreneur.com.
Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our next episode, where we'll be talking about the experience of recording our first 6 months worth of podcasts, because we are past the halfway mark of our first year, which is crazy and fun. Woo! And we are also going to be reflecting back on what we've learned during that process, that things that you could put to work for you. We're going to also be introducing a special series of 4 episodes on the theme of reflection, which basically means we're going to be looking back over our indie publishing experiences and telling you all about what we did wrong and how you can avoid making those same mistakes yourself in every area of the publishing process. So that'll be a special series in the next few episodes. So join us next week and we will talk about what not to do.
Or you can do the same mistakes we did and then have a fun, lovely story to tell to other people.
That's true. Free will. We believe in free will. You do what you're going to do. Until next time, happy writing.
Bye. See ya. Ciao a tutti. Lo so benissimo che non capite niente di quello che sto dicendo, però con il cuore vi do un appuntamento grandioso alla prossima settimana. Ciao a tutti!
Okay, sounds lovely, but what does it mean?
So I basically said, I don't know, I know you have no idea what I'm saying, but I just wanted to give you a lovely bye or hello from my heart, and then I'll see you in the next week.
Aww.
Something like that. Yeah, I always, like, when I have to speak the Italian, there is more like on the heart kind of stuff that usually pops out. If
more
I
of the sappy part.
Sappy part, exactly, yeah. But yeah, if you want me to do that this more, I would be happy to. I'm gonna be the only one understanding what I'm saying.
Every now and then it's kind of fun to sprinkle in. It makes us feel exotic and fancy.
If you notice, I was very careful not to speak in Italian in this past like 25 or 26 because like I didn't know what kind of reaction I had, but we can use this as a benchmark. If people say we want more Italian, give it to us, then you have it.
All right, well, if you're watching this and you want more Italian, use your comments boxes to demand that.
In Italian or in English, French, Mandarin, whatever you want.
Do you speak all of those? Because you're throwing that out there, but I don't speak all of those.
Okay, Spanish, English, Italian.
Un poquito? Un
poquito di español lo hablo. Lo hablo un poquito porque lo he estudiado a la universidad para 2 años.
Okay, so you spent 2 years studying that at university.
Very
so that's
good.
Yeah. I understand better than I speak for my Spanish. But,
but you know what? What's the funny stuff? When I worked in Orlando, Florida at the Walt Disney World, I actually had to use more Spanish than English. Can you believe that?
Yeah, because America.
I've used that a lot. And Miami was like basically there 2-3 hours, whatever it was, 4 hours with the car. So yeah, that was my practice.